Leeno exhaled sharply, glaring at the smoking engine beneath the raised hood of his car. A dead machine, just like his marriage. He wiped his hands on his jeans, frustration pulsing through him. The heat of the afternoon clung to his skin, but it was nothing compared to the slow-burning resentment tightening his chest. He had called David, his husband of 8 years, twice, but each call had gone to voicemail. No surprise there. David barely had time for him these days. Their conversations had dwindled to short exchanges about groceries, unpaid bills, or some work event that David always prioritized over them. The touch, the affection, the passion, gone. Some nights, Leeno lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time David had truly seen him. Now, alone in the driveway with a useless car in a worse mood, Leeno ran a hand to his short, dark hair. He muttered another curse under his breath. Then from behind him, a deep, amused voice cut through the thick air. "You need help, neighbor?" Leeno turned toward the sound, and there he was, Maxwell. Towering, confident, and annoyingly self-assured, Maxwell leaned against a fence that separated their properties, arms crossed over his broad chest. His grease-streaked hands and half-button work shirt told Leeno he'd been in his garage, probably working on one of his motorcycles. Leeno had always noticed Maxwell. Too much. The way his muscles flexed beneath his shirt. The way his smirk always seemed half a second away from turning into something dangerous. Maxwell had that cocky, teasing energy, the kind that made Leeno both irritated and intrigued. And right now, he really didn't need Maxwell's smugness added to his bad day. "I'm fine," Leeno muttered, closing the hood a little too hard. Maxwell didn't budge. "Sure about that?" Leeno rolled his shoulders. "It's just," he sighed. The truth felt heavier than the damn engine. "It won't start. I've tried everything." Maxwell tilted his head, eyes sharp, calculating. Popped the hood again. There was no point in arguing. Leeno was a stubborn man, but Maxwell was worse. He lifted the hood, stepping aside as Maxwell moved in, standing close. Too close. The scent of motor oil, sweat, and something distinctly Maxwell filled Leeno's lungs. "See!" Leeno gestured toward the engine. Completely dead. Maxwell hummed, running a rough hand over the wiring. "Not dead, just neglected." He shot Leeno a knowing glance. Leeno hated how that one word, neglected, felt like it hit more than just the car. Maxwell grinned, like he knew exactly what was running through Leeno's mind. Could be the starter, or maybe she just needs the right touch. The way he said it, the way his voice dipped, low, deliberate, edged with something that curled around Leeno's spine. Leeno crossed his arms, willing himself to ignore it. "You can fix it?" Maxwell wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket. "I can fix a lot of things, Leeno." The air between them shifted. Leeno felt it. He was sure Maxwell did too. Maxwell had always flirted with him. Subtle at times, blatant at others. But Leeno had never entertained it, had always walked away before lines could blur. Now, standing in his driveway, his husband absent, and Maxwell right there, it didn't feel so easy to walk away. Maxwell leaned in slightly, voice a murmur. "You always this tense, or just when I'm around?" Leeno swallowed hard. His skin felt too tight, his chest too full. He shouldn't like this. But he did. And that scared him more than anything. Leeno should have walked away. Instead, he followed Maxwell into the garage. The scent of oil and metal thick in the air. The space was a mechanic's haven, cluttered with tools, half-fixed engines, and the kind of controlled chaos that somehow suited Maxwell perfectly. Maxwell grabbed a wrench from the workbench, rolling his shoulders. His shirt was still undone at the top, just enough to hint at muscle, at sweat, at something Leeno shouldn't be looking at. But he was. He sat on a nearby stool, arms crossed, pretending not to be affected. "You didn't have to do this," Leeno muttered, watching as Maxwell tinkered with a spare starter. Maxwell didn't look up. "You asked if I could fix it. I said yes." A pause. Then, "That wasn't the only thing broken, though, was it?" Leeno's breath hitched. He hated that Maxwell could do this. Say things that felt like they meant one thing, but carried another weight entirely. "Don't know what you're talking about." Leeno lied. Maxwell chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a terrible liar." He turned, leaning against the workbench, wrench still in hand. You want to know something funny? Leeno arched a brow. Do I? Maxwell ignored the sarcasm, eyes dark, unreadable. I used to think you had the perfect life. Nice house, nice husband, stability. He tossed the wrench onto the bench. Then I started noticing things. Leeno tensed. Noticing what? Maxwell took a step forward. Then another, closing the distance. How you don't wear your ring anymore, he murmured. How you sit outside at night, looking at nothing. How your voice gets tight whenever you mention his name. Leeno's fingers curled against his thigh. You're imagining things. Maxwell smiled, slow, knowing, and dangerous. Am I? His voice dropped, closer now, almost intimate. Tell me to stop, Leeno. Tell me to back off, and I will. Leeno's pulse pounded in his ears. His breathing had gone shallow, his body betraying him in ways he didn't want to admit, but he couldn't say the words. He didn't want Maxwell to stop, and Maxwell knew it. He reached out, fingers brushing Leeno's wrist. Light, teasing, but enough to send a shock up his arm. Leeno's chest rose and fell, his restraint unraveling thread by thread. Then the moment shattered. A phone vibrated against the workbench. Leeno jerked back, like he'd been burned. Maxwell exhaled, slow and measured, but there was something behind his eyes, something unreadable, something patient. Leeno glanced at his phone. David's name flashed on the screen. For the first time in a long time, he hesitated before answering. Leeno stared at the phone screen, David's name glowing like a warning. He let it ring, let it go to voicemail. Maxwell didn't say anything, but the way he watched, asterisk, calm, expectant, knowing, asterisk, made Leeno's stomach twist. He should have picked up, should have said something. But what was there to say? David wouldn't ask if he was okay. He wouldn't even notice the hesitation in Leeno's voice. Their marriage had become a series of transactions, not a partnership. And Leeno was tired of waiting, tired of wanting. Maxwell stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as if giving Leeno one last chance to walk away. Leeno didn't move. You didn't answer, Maxwell said, voice low. Leeno swallowed hard. Didn't feel like talking. Something flickered in Maxwell's gaze, approval maybe, or something darker. The air between them grew thick, charged with something neither of them pretended to ignore anymore. Maxwell reached out, fingers grazing Leeno's forearm. Barely a touch, but enough to make him shiver. You keep waiting for him to see you, Leeno, Maxwell murmured. But he won't. Leeno's breath came unsteady. Maxwell wasn't wrong. Maxwell exhaled, shaking his head. You deserve better. Leeno let out a strained laugh. And you think that's you? Maxwell smirked. I think you already know the answer. Then he kissed him. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just heat and need, sharp and undeniable. Leeno should have pulled away, but he didn't. He pressed forward, gripping Maxwell's shirt, dragging him closer. Months, maybe years, of restrained desire snapped, unraveling into something desperate. Maxwell's hands roamed, firm and possessive, like he'd been waiting for this just as long. He backed Leeno against the workbench, lips trailing down his jaw, his throat hot, claiming. Leeno gasped. He had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted. David hadn't touched him in months, hadn't kissed him like this in years. Maxwell's teeth scraped the sensitive skin beneath his ear, sending a shudder through his body. Tell me to stop, Maxwell murmured against the skin. Leeno's fingers curled into Maxwell's shirt. Don't. That was all it took. Maxwell lifted him onto the workbench, hands gripping his thighs, pulling him flush against his body. Hard, unapologetic. Leeno exhaled sharply, his head tipping back as Maxwell's lips devoured him. For the first time in years, he felt alive, and he never wanted it to stop. Leeno woke to the scent of motor oil and musk, the weight of another body pressed against him. For a second, in that foggy space between sleep and reality, he forgot where he was, forgot what he had done. Then Maxwell stirred beside him, arm draped over Leeno's waist, his body warm, solid, unapologetic. And just like that, it all came crashing back. Leeno's breath hitched. His gaze darted around the dimly lit garage. Clothes scattered on the concrete floor. The workbench's edge still sharp against his memory. The scent of sweat and sin clinging to his skin. What had he done? Maxwell shifted, pressing a lazy kiss to Leeno's shoulder. You're thinking too hard. Leeno stiffened. I shouldn't be here. Maxwell hummed, unbothered. But you are. He propped himself on one elbow, gaze heavy-lidded but sharp. And you don't regret it. Leeno sat up, running a hand through his hair. Guilt coiled in his stomach, thick and twisting. He wasn't sure if it was because of David, or because he didn't feel guilty enough. Maxwell leaned back, watching him. You gonna pretend this didn't happen? Leeno exhaled. I don't know. Silence stretched between them, but Maxwell didn't fill it with empty words. He just watched, waiting, because Maxwell never pushed, never begged. He just gave Leeno the space to decide. And that was the problem, because Maxwell saw him in ways David never had, never would. The thought made his chest ache. Then his phone buzzed. Leeno flinched, the sound slicing through the thick air. He reached for it, hesitating before looking at the screen. David. The message was short, direct, cold. We need to talk when I get home. Leeno stared at the words, heart pounding. Did David know? Had he finally noticed? Or was this just another obligatory conversation, another reminder of everything they weren't anymore? Maxwell sat up, voice steady. What are you going to do? Leeno didn't answer, because he didn't know. Not yet. All he knew was this. For the first time in years, he had a choice, and that terrified him more than anything. And